All right, so there's been quite a bit of discussion about the teams moving regions in RLCS and should Psyonix and the Rocket League Esports team, should they begin to implement, moderation or restrictions on how some of this works. There was a bit of discussion about this in the offseason, mostly specifically around James Cheese, and I'll get into why that is, because that's not the first team that's done it. And there are other teams that are doing it, but James Cheese was like a heavy focus this offseason, and I'll explain all this stuff in just a few moments. But this tweet kind of re-sparked, if that makes sense, the discussion, and got it moving once again. And so this is First Touch. If you do not follow First Touch, you should follow First Touch. You should watch it. It's a fantastic podcast on the Rocket League channel. A lot of great topics, a lot of great discussion, and extremely entertaining. So big shout out to First Touch. But they tweet, should teams in RLCS be composed of at least 2/3 of players from a given region to compete in that region? An example would be a MENA team needs 2 players from the MENA region at a minimum. Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and make sure to tune in to First Touch tomorrow as we debate this topic. All right, there is quite a bit of discussion underneath this thread, and I'm going to get to it. But I want to outline a few things first. So, last season in RLCS 21-22, we had Complexity move from South America to North America. That was a full 3-person squad moving to a new region. And from my understanding as an outsider, the idea was to get better competition, potentially raise your earning potential, whether that's salary, earnings in tournaments, advertiser dollars for the organization, et cetera, et cetera. That stuff pays a little bit better in North America. The viewership is higher. So there's that. And so that happened last season. And then this offseason, we had quite a bit of this happening. CRR is a player from Spain. He moved over as a roster change for that Complexity team. So not only did they move from South America to North America, they have now imported a European player as well, and they are continuing to compete in North America. We have now had a second team import from South America to North America. In Furia, we have 2 European players. Appjack and Nolly have imported from Europe, and they have joined alongside Chronic, who is a North American native. And now they are competing in North America. And we also have a team that has moved to APAC. The team's name is James Cheese. It is Kami, who was previously on Renegades in OCE, one of the top few teams in that region. He moved over, joined up alongside Realize, and they also brought in Virtuoso from Europe, who previously has had some success as a pro, recently has been floating, I guess, more around the bubble level, not really had a ton of success, but he moved over as well. And so that's a team of 3, 1 European player, 1 OCE player, and 1 APAC player have all moved over to compete in APAC. There is another shout in the chat here. Tough Love is full of NA players. There's a couple of players that are studying abroad. There are a couple of players that have moved, and they live in Japan or South Korea, or I'm not sure exactly where, but they live in that region, and then they're competing. And then there's also been OSM. OSM is a high-level player from Europe as well. He has competed in 1v1 stuff and not had much success in 3s, but he moved over, and he is playing with 2 players from the APAC region as well. And here's why I think a lot of people are upset, is James Cheese is really just a cut above that entire region. They've dominated. They have won every single event. Most of the games are not close until they get into the top 4, and they're really just, they're asserting dominance. And I think people are looking at that dynamic of players moving from long-standing regions that have had infrastructure and fundamental support for RLCS at the professional level, moving to an emerging region, a newer region. APAC has only existed for 1 season, and so a lot of players they're not angry, but they have memed about it, saying it's a free spot. They're moving to that region so they can get a free spot at international events, at majors, etc. All right, so that's kind of the basis here that we're looking at. Before we jump into these arguments about for it or against it, I do want to pull up the official rule. And this is just additional restrictions. And what this kind of outlines what exactly you can do as a player, or how you can compete, or how you become eligible. The tournament in all parts, the tournament is referring to RLCS events, okay? The tournament in all parts is open to eligible players who reside in the eligibility area, but is void wherever restricted or prohibited by applicable law, or in any country where participation is prohibited by U.S. law. Okay. But the main thing here is the RLCS in all parts is open to eligible players who reside in the eligibility area. The eligibility area is just determined by, like Psyonix has outlined, these countries are in this region. So that's what eligibility area means. So basically the key word here is reside. It doesn't require citizenship or anything of that nature. But if you are living in or residing in that region, in fact, it's actually so vague, there is speculation that you could even potentially fly over to that region to compete and then fly back home once the event is over. Now, no teams are doing that. I want to make that very clear. No teams are doing that. If teams were doing that, I do think a lot of people would be pretty wound up about it. And I think that is like a critical piece to remember, but nobody's doing that. Nobody's flying in and then leaving. Okay? So there's the rule. You reside in your eligibility area, you can play. All right, so on the First Touch tweet, we'll look through some of these responses. Flitz is a North American player. He has floated around the bubble level for a little bit, had some success. He says he's explained this before, but it's too hard to draw a line. Tough Love in fall split was an APAC team with 3 Americans with all with valid reasons for being in APAC: family, study abroad, job, and shouldn't be punished for being there. So what he's saying is, if there are restrictions, and then you have players that are eligible or not eligible, if you have players that are capable, they are good enough to compete, and they are studying abroad, now they can no longer compete because of the restrictions. Or like the example, I think Direct let me know here in the chat, Sigums is in the U.S. military, which is why he's in Japan, so that would be his job. And so these players would be restricted from playing, and there's really just nothing they could do about it. So this is why Flitz says it's difficult to draw a hard line. Another bubble player here says if you're living in a region, you should be able to compete in that region no matter the circumstances. And there's a pretty... Direct, which did you reply to? Because there's a pretty lengthy back and forth. Okay, that is definitely not what we were looking at. Let me see if I can pull it up once again. It's a Rams tweet. Gotcha. I thought you had replied here. There's quite a bit of feedback here. I'll also go to Jorby's tweet. He quote tweeted First Touch and says, "I don't know about this. Restricting player movement isn't the solution. The problem persists of players who can't move being restricted by imports that make the region harder." Hold on. The problem persists of players who can't move being restricted by imports that make the region harder. Maybe requiring one player is better. Not perfect, but I am also not sure about the player restrictions the right path. I also don't know how much of a problem this really is. Obviously, other esports have the NA has no Americans or Canadians in the top 8 problem. One we may well have in the future. Where I think there was a Garrett G response somewhere here. He says, "I think in order to stop some chaos from happening, Psyonix will do it eventually, but I think they allow everyone who has moved to keep their status. It could make Worlds look a little odd, but that's really up to Psyonix and if they care about representation at events." So anyways, yeah, some people are weighing in on this. And so I thought it would be interesting to weigh in on here as well. So from my understanding, the big things against allowing players to, fluidly move to new regions or play wherever you are currently residing Most of the things that I see against it are that it's unfair to the players in that specific region. So we can look at this and we can say in APAC, this season they have one spot for majors or international events. That means 3 players from the APAC region get to represent that region of the world on the main stage. And if we look at the team that is representing APAC, it is one Japanese player with Realize. And then we have Kami and OCE or Kami and Bert who are from OCE in Europe. And so people are saying that is unfair to the players that live in APAC or that are originally from APAC because they're having their chances taken away from them. Which, to a degree, I do understand. And I can empathize with that. And I will say that those players, like I do feel some sympathy for them. All right? We'll say that for that piece. I think it maybe indirectly or unintentionally incentivizes players to move to emerging regions for free major spots. Free major spots. So what I'm saying there is, or what I think a lot of people are saying is, when you have an emerging region, the talent is not going to be on the same level as Europe or North America or even OCE and SAM because those regions have existed for a long time. There's been incentive for players to grind the game. There's been incentive for the players to, put work in, put time in, put effort in, and they have done this for years. There's infrastructure for those players to practice competing in online events and even in international events. And when you have regions that are newer and they don't have that same infrastructure, they don't have the same experience, that same history, it's going to be difficult for them to outperform players that do have that history, they do have that experience. And so I think, again, indirectly or unintentionally, it could potentially incentivize players to move from regions that have been long since established to the newer region because the talent level is not going to be there yet. Another thing that I see is that it kind of defeats the purpose of including regions around the world. If you have a European player and an OCE player representing APAC on the main stage, it kind of begs the question, well, what's the point in having APAC as a region at all? Right? And again, I do, to a degree, I understand what that's saying, but I'll have some rebuttals for that in a moment. And then the last point, and probably the most important, is it's cringe. I'm kidding. But I do see people saying that. They're saying it's cringe. They're taking the easy way out. If Virtuoso wanted to be at a major, then he should do it in Europe. That's what a lot of people are saying. So that's what I'm interpreting or hearing as far as points against it. And what I will say is these are some of my reasons that I'm not necessarily against it, at least not at this specific moment. Okay? The first thing is that players are actually living there, they're scrimming there, they are actually investing in the RLCS economy of that region. All right? And earlier we talked about the examples of a team flying into APAC for the events and then going back home. If that was happening, I don't think I would be okay with it. I don't think I'd be okay with it. I think that is, not good because they are not really investing in the economy of that region. It just feels a little bit wrong. It feels a little bit scummy or immoral. The second thing is it's not easy to do. It is not easy to uproot your life and move to a new place where you're most likely leaving your family, you're most likely leaving your friends, or anything else that's comfortable. It requires sacrifice. It's going to take a mental toll on these players. So I think a lot of people have this idea that players are moving and it's only positives. It's super easy. It's a great thing for them. There are no drawbacks. I do think there are some drawbacks. The majority, and of course there are exceptions, the majority of players that would consider this are lower level RLCS and even more likely, at least in my opinion, bubble level, or players that are not even really in RLCS. Most of your teams that are top 8, top 10, even top 12, top 16 in North America and Europe are probably not going to go to SSA or APAC or even OCE. And the reason is you're probably not going to improve when you surround yourself by players that are not as good as you. And so I think and this is speculation, I could certainly be wrong, but I think that this is going to be something that usually players that are on the outskirts of RLCS are going to look at doing. Because if you think about why is it even attractive in the first place, it's attractive because you get an opportunity to play in RLCS. Well, if you're in the top 16 in North America and Europe, you're already getting that opportunity to play in RLCS. Yes, it's harder competition, and yes, you may not be at the top of it, but you're already receiving that opportunity. When you are on the outskirts and you don't really get the opportunity, you don't really get the chance, that is the players that's going to look at that and they'll be like, maybe I could get a chance to compete and maybe even go to an international event, a LAN, if I move there. And here, in my opinion, and this is something that I haven't really seen talked about a whole lot, but this is, in my opinion, pretty important. These players that are pursuing professional play and even playing professionally, now I understand that at your top, you're still making good money, but these players aren't making loads and loads of money like traditional sports. In general, it's still a very new thing, and I think being too restrictive too early on can stunt growth for the players and even the RLCS product. I think we have this, and myself included, we have this tendency to relate this to traditional sports, but traditional sports have survived, thrived, upgraded, made adjustments, perfected their product for a long time. Esports is like in year, like 10, maybe 15 if you count some of the older ones. I would argue even newer, like it's even a smaller sample size than that. I think it's very much still fleshing itself out. It's very much still like learning what it is and how to operate. And I'm just not a huge fan of restrictions, too heavy restrictions too early on. I think if we can kind of zoom out and think more macro, we can think more long-term, I think that is going to be beneficial for the growth of the esport. Another thing for me is that these, like, and this ties into what I was previously saying, these players have a skill and they put in a ton of time and effort to get to the level that they're at and to perfect that skill or get closer to perfecting that skill. I want them to be able to try to make something out of that. Right now, when esports is still very new and players are, like, a lot of them are making part-time job money, I want them to be able to try to further their career. I want them to be able to try to make something out of it and continue to pursue it. I think this bodes well obviously for those specific players, but it bodes well for future players as well because it encourages the idea that you can make it. It encourages the idea that you can turn this into a thing that you can pursue as a full-time career. I also think it further legitimizes esports ecosystem through players being rewarded for their efforts. Right now, again, if I harken back to one of the points that I made before, a lot of these players that are going to be potentially eyeing these options are players that are not currently getting the opportunity to compete in RLCS, which means they're probably not making a very good salary if they are at all. So if this is a potential opportunity for them to, use that talent, use that hard work, and turn it into something, I don't want to restrict them. And this right here, I think, is probably like the integral part of my opinion, is that my opinion right now is my opinion right now. It's temporary. And I think this is something that is going to be ever-changing, ever-evolving as esports grows and as esports exists longer. I think it's more than fair to reevaluate things and make changes, make adjustments. I think that is, I think it's a good thing. I think it's smart as the esports ecosystem and just entire industry continues to grow. There will be things that change, and there will be norms that have to be adjusted. So, I think right now, players, it's not, pursuing RLCS is not some like exorbitantly lucrative career opportunity. They're not making millions of dollars. A lot of these players are still making like very average wages. And it's a stressful career that requires a lot of sacrifice and investment. And I just really don't like the idea of restricting it. I've got a similar stance on pro players playing in CRL. A lot of people are not okay with that. And I think, again, this kind of stems from us looking at traditional sports and saying, well, traditional sports don't do it. Why should esports? And I just think while there are a lot of things to look at and compare and learn from with traditional sports, there are some differences. And I think this is, for me, my opinion, I think this is one of the differences. I want these players to be able to pursue these opportunities. I want them to be able to turn their hard work and their efforts into something, tangible, measurable, valuable, something that they can continue to pursue. And so my stance at the moment is I'm not against it, but it's at the moment. I think right now, esports are still very new, and Rocket League esports is still new as well. And, I think I'm very hesitant. I'm very skeptical. I would be very cautious restricting player movement because, like I said, I think a big part of it right now is the money. These players this is not some, super lucrative opportunity where there's just tons and tons of money on the line. These players, especially when they move to an emerging region, they're making sacrifices where they're not going to make a lot of money. Those prize pools in those regions are not huge. So currently, I'm okay with it. I don't really have any problems with it at this moment. In the next 3 to 5 years, maybe my opinion will change, especially if it becomes something that is very common. If top 8 in APAC only features 4 Japanese players or players from the APAC region, then yeah, I think we probably need to reevaluate things. But at the moment, I'm not really against it. I don't really have any problems with it. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Or if you want to get involved in discussions like these, come to the channel, twitch.tv/Hoodyhooo. I stream every weekday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Thank you for watching, and we'll catch you next time.